Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming to the 18 to 80 session and not going to Vivienne Westwood, because this is the place to be. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We've got 4 amazing women here. We've got an hour, which means approximately I want them all to speak for about 15 minutes each, and you not to hear my voice at all, because that's the way I want it to be. In order of seniority, in reverse order of seniority, to my left we have Ioana, surname? Anghelescu, who is the future, basically, as you can see. She's a festival maker. She helps here at WOW. She was a wowser, as you can tell from her t-shirt. What else should I tell everybody about you, Ioana? What would you like them to know?
Mainly that I'm a 17-year-old who is most well known to the outer world for the work I do here at Southbank.
Good, thank you. Bim Adewunmi is a blogger, Guardian journalist, and a bit of a firecracker.
Oh, God.
Yes, you are. You've got a blog, Yoruba Girl?
Yes, dancing.
Dancing.
Yes.
In which you write very wise things. When I jumped online to have a look at Bim's blog, it said, draw your lines and try your very hardest to stick to them. Maybe we'll see whether Bim's ever crossed any of her own lines, like maybe Obama's red lines. Next up is Kathy Lette, who is
Hi.
Owner of the bluest eyes and sharpest pins and tongue in London, actually probably in 2 hemispheres.
Oh.
She's a great addition to the national scene and livens up any gathering. Obviously, best-selling author, need we say, and there has a cocktail in the Savoy named after her.
do, yeah.
Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. We might go and drink one later, girls. What do you reckon?
Let's all have... Katharine Whitehorn, to my right, very much not Kathy, I've just been told, is a heroine of mine. And when I went to edit The Lady, the first thing I do was wrote a long, passionate letter to Katharine, asking her if she would be our columnist, and she declined very politely, saying she was far too busy. Katharine is well known for her journalism, for her books, amongst them Cooking in a Bedsit, for having virtually invented the personal column, a genre I'm not sure she thinks sustained itself for very long. Maybe we'll talk about that. And still working, obviously, as a columnist for Saga magazine and probably many other publications, including The Observer, which is why I wanted to steal your column, because it's such a good column and it's nice and short. There we are. This is our panel, and I think I want to start by asking them in now reverse order, starting with Katharine, what feminism has meant to them.
Well, I think I'm one of the lucky ones, because I grew up in a time when women were actually beginning to be allowed to do far more good things. It wasn't a question of being brought up to be a nice little housewife and then breaking away. I don't think anybody expected me to be able to be a housewife. And the way women journalism has changed over the time that I've been there. It used to be that you either had the women's page, which was all right, but it was strictly limited, and if you were working on the main pages, you had to watch exactly like a man, had to write exactly like a man. And now, really, I think women have got darn near an equal voice in the papers, more than the men in some places, less in others. But it's not a fight we've lost.
Well, I'm pleased to hear you say that, Kathy. I'm not going to jump in. Let's go, Kathy. What's feminism meant to you? Please illustrate your answer with examples.
Okay. Well, I became a feminist in my teens because I grew up in Australia, where the men disproved the theory of evolution. They're kind of evolving into apes. And as an example of how sexist they were, they used to get us to cut their names out in paper, sticky tape them to our stomachs, and then sunbake so we get a tan tattoo in the shape of their name. So if ever I get cancer, I'll have a melanoma called Bruce. I'll have to have like a brucectomy to get rid of it. So that turned me into a feminist, and all of my books have been very feminist, but I make them funny, so you kind of sugarcoat the message. And my feeling is, oh my God, you know, over 100 years since Emily Pankhurst tied herself to the railings, we still don't have equal pay, we're still getting concussion hitting our head on the glass ceiling, and we're supposed to, you know, clean it while we're up there. So any woman who calls herself a post-feminist has kept her wonder bra and burnt her brains, because we have a long way to go. But I also think that women are each other's human wonder bras, uplifting, supportive, and making each other look bigger and better. And that's what this whole WOW Festival is about, us coming together and supporting each other.
Bim.
I don't have a eureka moment. I haven't got a Bruce melanoma possibility in my future. But I can't pinpoint a time when I didn't think I was a feminist, which I think is probably a bit to do with my age and the world I was born into. But in recent years, over the last, I suppose, 15 years, I've done a lot of my own personal reading and try to find the places where I fit and the places where I don't fit and try to make myself fit into those places. And that includes saying things like yes a lot more. And I think a lot of women want to say yes, but are not encouraged to. And what I try to do is whenever I'm asked to do anything, including this, I say yes. And I think a lot of us don't say yes. So that for me is my kind of my everyday feminism, is to try and insert myself in places where perhaps I wouldn't ordinarily be.
It's leaning in, it's what Sheryl Sandberg.
It's leaning in, but
leaning in,
yeah, but slightly less Sheryl Sandberg-y wanky.
Leaning in and bringing others with you.
Yeah.
Come on like that. Ioana.
I think I'm a bit of a weird one because I don't really label myself as a feminist, and that is simply because I don't think that equality should be something so abstract that we need to be like, yes, I have this title, so I'm fighting for this cause. It shouldn't be a cause at all. It should just naturally be there because that's a normal world and a properly functioning society. So I don't think that feminism means that much to me, but in a way I do try to make myself as equal as I possibly can to everybody else. And I don't know, it's just really great when you can just do that. And I don't know, it's like when you have the opportunity to put yourself out there, as Bim was saying, I don't see why you shouldn't take it, because that's your bit of making yourself heard and putting yourself out there. And I think that's really what it's all about, making yourself heard and getting your message across.
Okay, at this point, I think what I'd like to do is to work out where we are in terms of where are we on the feminist spectrum, because from what all four of you have said, I could roughly summarize. Katharine Whitehorn was thrilled with the opportunities that she had as a woman, because although all her aunts went to Cambridge, it was quite unusual to have the sort of career she had at the time she had it. Kathy and I are pretty much of the same generation, and I think that we feel that we're not post-feminist, we are maybe peri-feminist at the moment. And I sense in my younger colleagues and panelists, not a reluctance to engage with the word feminist, but a sense that it should be irrelevant. But Kathy and I, at our great age, know it's not. And I think we're still probably much angrier than either our older sisters and our younger sisters. And I think that's interesting. And I wonder whether the panel could say, where do we think we are on the feminist spectrum? From Katharine first.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come an awful long distance, but the very fact of something happened within the last few days, the Observer's always treated me all right, but they have just started, more or less without, as far as I can gather, any sort of approval from the boss people, a blog which is to be entirely women's writing. It's simply going to be called She Said, because the women feel they aren't getting a proper shake.
Really?
So I think we've come a long distance, but it's a battle that's never totally won. I mean, there ought to be, creative tension between what they want and what we want.
Who are they?
Chaps.
Chaps.
But Katharine, if you had power, well, how would you change it for women? I mean, I know that's an enormous question. It was like Moynihan on Sky asked me this morning what I'd do about Ukraine.
Are you going to tell us what you do about it?
I said, and I got a lot of abuse on Twitter for saying that we should sequester the Russian oligarchs' houses in Hyde Park and not give them back until they got out of the Ukraine. But what can we do?
Well, actually, I think the things that are beginning to happen at last, about the things that really matter a damn sight more, by which I mean IGM, and The Observer was the first one that did a big thing of it, the woman who's at right.
FGM,
I think there's plenty to do, simply making things a bit more fair and making sure there are other opportunities. Never mind perfection, let's get rid of the awful things.
All right, well, what about quotas, for example, for women on boards and on shortlists?
Well, my view on this.
Yeah, and then quickly, and then I'm going to move to Kathy.
I think they should be roundly threatened by it, but I don't think they should actually have it, because I know an awful lot of women on boards who got there on their own merits, and they would be furious to think that they got there because it's a quota. I mean, I've even been on boards myself, don't laugh.
Kathy, where are we on the spectrum, and what, if you had any power, which you do, would you do to make it better?
Well, I think it's interesting talking to younger women when you say, "Oh, I'm not a feminist." I think your generation has all the benefits of feminism, but none of the battle scars. And if you think back to how it was when we were starting out in the profession, I mean, my first job interview when I was 21, I went to have a job on a TV station in Australia, and I had a lot of high-powered men. Have you heard of Kerry Packer? Kerry Packer and all these other famous big Australian business guys on the panel. This was my job interview. Kerry Packer slapped $10 on the table and said to me, "I bet I can make your tits move without touching them." And I go, "Oh, okay, you know." He just leans over, grabs my boobs, squeezes me, and then kills himself laughing and says, "There's the $10 you won, ha ha ha." Not being green, I already had a novel out and already had a column in the newspaper. I put $20 on the table and said, "I bet I can make your balls move without touching him," and kicked him between the legs.
You did
okay.
it!
Yeah. Okay. Got the job, but what a hell of a job interview that is. This is what it was like when we were starting out. And I also don't think you become angry as a woman until you see how unequal the workplace and the home place is. Once you have children, you know, women make up 50% of the workforce, but we're still doing 99.9% of all the housework and all the childcare. You know, even though I keep saying to men it's scientifically proven that no woman ever shot her husband while he was vacuuming, they're not helping. And that's when you start to get angry. And also at my age, 55, when I look at television, for example, and I see no woman my age on television, you know, we get disappeared, and then you realise how facial prejudice is something that we suffer from, that we get judged in our looks in a way that men don't. I mean, for women, wordplay is foreplay. I mean, how else is, you know, Bill Clinton and all the others still getting laid? So you do get angrier as you realise, as you reach milestones in your life, how women are underrepresented and how we're discriminated against. So I bet in a couple of years I see you and you're a raging, furious feminist.
Okay, Kathy. Okay, my 3 questions then. Let's make it. Women on comedy shows, would you have a quota? Women on boards, would you have a quota? Women in Parliament, as it were, in the process to get them there, would you have a quota?
Well, on comedy shows, there's been a lot in the papers recently, Danny Cohen saying he's going to make it mandatory, emphasis on man, to have a woman on the panel show. But we're going into a male environment. I mean, I think we're up shit creek without a panel. Why can't we have our own show? You know, where it's not so combative and so competitive. I mean, women, female, if you had a comedy show on the panel with Sandy Toksvig, Ruby Wax, Ronnie Ancona, Jennifer Saunders, Dawn French, all those fabulous
somebody
females.
cast it. I wish they
How
did.
funny and fabulous would that be? Would you not watch that?
Yes.
But when you go on those shows, the testosterone, you can smell it, you know, and it's really intimidating to go into that boys' club. So I do believe in quotas, but I also believe in carving out our own areas. And will anyone ever commission that? No.
Okay. Bim, I don't know whether you have children or not. Okay, so do you accept Kathy's proposition that once you have children, and so you hit sexism at home as well as in the workplace, you are necessarily angrier.
Yes, but I'd also like to say that I'm very happy to call myself a feminist, and I'm plenty angry right now.
Good. Tell us why.
Tell
us
because
why.
there's a lot of anger-making stuff. I mean, for everything Kathy said, I kept nodding and saying, yeah, well, I know this. And I might not have quite the same battle scars, but I do have some. So I wanted to make that very clear, that I'm flipping angry, and I don't want to say the word flipping, so yeah. I've written about being that angry, and I think there's also layers to my anger, in the way that I don't have children, but I am a black woman in the UK, from Africa. So I understand that there are layers to anger and layers to this kind of feminist rage. So I'm more than happy to call myself a feminist, more than happy to call myself a womanist. I am all those things, and I do think that with age and with more experiences, you will get angrier because it becomes more and more apparent just how unfair the world is. I do believe in quotas, and I say we go ahead and we force through these quotas because they're necessary. And I know that, yes, it's going to be walking into essentially a testosterone den. Having said that, there need to be pioneers, and people need to do this. And I know that sounds incredibly naive because hey, I'm not Andy Osho, I'm not Gina Yashiri. I don't have to walk in and kind of go, hi guys, I'm the quota. But I do think that it has to be done. Yeah. I think we have to force certain things through because that's how it becomes part of the culture. Yeah. If we're waiting for this groundswell of stuff, I think people forget that legislation doesn't work on its own. It requires the culture around it to change as well. And that's done in quiet, tiny whispering campaigns. It's done in magazine columns and newspaper pieces. It's done, the idea of the fact that women work or that women vote at one time was impossible to consider, and that changed. But it wasn't just the law that changed it, it was the surrounding culture that changed. And I think that's where, as a writer, that's where I fit in. That's where I get to kind of have some activism that is actually active as opposed to just, being a little bit sad about it or a little bit angry about it.
Bim, can you tell us how you feel about, as a black woman from Africa, about the fact that this country is run by white Aldertonian males?
Incredibly pissed off. Because we're here. I'm in East London. A few months ago, I was in Berlin for a stretch on a journalism fellowship, which is another thing that I said yes to and just applied for and got, so you should do that. And I was out there, and that was the first time in my entire life. I have had this afro for about 3 years now, and in Berlin, a stranger put his hand into my hair, and he didn't just touch my hair, he massaged my scalp. And then afterwards, when I turned around in shock, said to me, Kunta, as in Kunta Kinte, the slave from Roots. And then he also said fufu, which I thought was quite accurate, because I am West African and we eat a lot of fufu, but it's not the point. And then I came home, and lots of my London friends were like, oh my God, that's outrageous, and that would never happen here, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it wouldn't happen here, and that's true. But that's not to say that there isn't a lot of, excuse my language, shit that we all have to deal with outside of that. So our problems are different, and they change. But the fact that no one in Berlin, people were outraged, but they weren't really. They were like, oh, is it a big deal if someone touches your hair? Afros are made for touching. Someone said that to me. Afros are made for touching. And then you compare that to the UK, which again is not at the top of where it should be, but it's slowly moving there. We're trying to move things forward. So I'm ticked off because I walk around my neighborhood and I see black faces everywhere. And then I look at what is represented back to me from newspapers and magazines and the TV and even radio. I love Radio 4. It's the whitest place in Britain. It's the whitest, malest, oldest place in Britain. And I love Radio 4. I go on Radio 4. I talk on Radio 4. I know all these things. But I'm a little bit angry that we're not doing more to push these things. And I know these are fairly niche concerns, but they affect us all. And they color the way we see other things. Very quickly, I was writing about Annie, the new, the remake of the film that was made, Daddy Warbucks, War Off and all that stuff. And they've recast it, and they've cast the Oscar-nominated actress Quvenzhané Wallis as Annie. So she's black, and she has the same corkscrew curls, and they're kind of, they're brown, they're not red curls. And what's amazing to me, well, not amazing, but sad, is you go onto Twitter, and someone's done a marvelous job collecting all the comments about this new black Annie. And lots of people, let me give you a tiny example of some of the comments. Someone said, WTF, Annie isn't black. WTF, black girls aren't called Annie. Someone else said, oh, she's not so innocent anymore. And that's the one that struck me. She's not so innocent anymore. Your blackness itself becomes a thing that you're having to break out of, this idea of it. And this is what I mean about the whispering campaigns. We have to start at the bottom all the way up, because that's how things change. And I don't think, we can say, yeah, we're going to force classrooms to go and watch Black Annie. We could do that, but it's somewhere outside of that. There's something else. And the culture itself isn't being discussed. So we can talk about legislation and the quotas and so on, and I think that's a great thing, and I support quotas 100%. I have never been against them. However, I think the bigger problem is not the quotas, it's the culture around it. No one's doing enough to try and push that up and chase that.
Thanks, Bim. Ioana, you're much younger than everyone on the panel, I would say.
Thanks.
And have you had any experience yet of sexism? And you declared yourself to be I don't know what you said you weren't a feminist. Well, how would you describe yourself? So that's two. One, have you experienced sexism at your young age? Mm-hmm. And two, if you're not a feminist, what are you?
I'll do with the second question first, because
Okay.
that's a bit shorter. I'm more of an equalitarian in the sense that I support equality for everyone. It's not, oh my God, I'm a woman and I'm being oppressed. I know that's what we see more of, but I think that it doesn't really matter if you're a male or a female. If there's something wrong with what's happening to you, that should be addressed. So I think feminism is under that umbrella, but I think I'm more of an everything rather than just a focused feminist that only focuses on women and their problems. And now about sexism, I haven't directly experienced it, but I remember yesterday I was talking to one of my friends and he said, well, my mum's working tonight, and I was like, all right. And then he said to me, my mum has been out of work for 26 years. She is now 50 and got a job. And I just remember how weird it felt, like, oh my God, a 50-year-old woman managed to get a job, because we should all know how hard it is. Businesses don't want, well, most of them at least, they don't really want middle-aged people. They're more aiming for the younger generation that can work for longer hours, doesn't have as many engagements, doesn't have to do all of these sorts of things. And I just said to him, well, wow, your mother got a job. And now thinking back on it, it's just really weird. I mean, that shouldn't happen. Like, why should we discriminate on people because, I don't know, in 10 years' time they're going to retire anyway and we're going to lose the service? There's many other people in the world that we can choose from afterwards. And I don't know, it's just not right. And also another thing that really, really upsets me is the fact that I've had another friend that said, well, my sister is 25 and she's engaged. And she went for a job interview and she took her engagement ring off. And I was like, why on earth would you do that? Because nowadays they tend not to want people that are just newlywed or about to get married, because they think, well, you're a woman, you just got married, you're going to want to have a child soon, so we don't really want to take you on because we don't really want to pay your maternity leave.
And what do you think about that, Ioana?
I think that's really stupid. I mean, it really annoys me because I'm thinking myself, well, at one point I'm going to have to go on maternity leave myself. I'm going to go get my family. I'm going to go have a child. And I don't want to worry about this stuff. I mean, it's just this whole lot of pressure that society puts on us, and it's so unnecessary.
I think, to your right, 3 women are thinking the woman who got a job age 50 probably had a full-time job already looking after 3 generations. Kathy.
Oh, no.
Catherine. Catherine first.
Whichever. I think that, in a way, 2 trends are hitting each other, because it used to be that anybody who was a worker, man or woman, started off as not knowing it, then worked and then stopped at a given age, the retirement age. And it's just not like that anymore, because we're all living so much longer. And it's really, instead of having 3 ages, it's 4. It's child, normal working life, and then the final bit, but between, there is the bit between 50 and 80, or whenever it is. The academics call it the emeritus phase. And Ross Altman, who ran Saga for a bit, Bing, comes from there. She calls it the bonus years, which is rather nice. But the point is that the whole way in which we get aged is different, and an awful lot of women, whether they really want it or not, are grandmothers looking after their working daughters' babies.
Yeah.
Kathy.
Well, women have to juggle so much. We could all be in the Moscow State Circus, and it starts when you have your children. And the big argument, Rachel and I are often going on about this with our husbands, is that they don't help around the house. And when I'm rushing around, a working mother getting her kids up and out of the house in the morning, well, the Dunkirk evacuation would be easier to organise than that. And I'm always saying to my husband, you've got to help me more around the house. And he's like, well, I'd like to help, but I'm a man and I can't multitask. Now that is a biological cop-out. Can you imagine any man having any trouble multitasking at, say, an orgy? He would have no trouble at that time. So that does not wash. And then, of course, after you've raised your own children, you have a brief window before you're then looking after your grandchildren, the menopause, which is another taboo subject that we never talk about. Women are supposed to have passed their amuse-by date once they hit 50. And, you think, God is definitely a bloke. All the things women have to put up with, from period cramps to pregnancy to childbirth, where you stretch your vagina the customary 5 kilometres, and then, the breastfeeding with mastitis, and then the menopause, and just when everything goes quiet, do you know what happens? You grow a beard. How can that be fair? So, but the menopause is an interesting subject because nobody admits they're having the menopause. I do. I'm having my own weather. But Nigella Lawson, all women in their 50s are going through this, but nobody talks about it because if you admit to it, the idea that you're no longer fertile, the idea is that society will just put you on the shelf and you'll be bypassed. So ageism is a really big problem for women. And the pressure on you to keep looking young, this is a really feminist issue, and we have to stop cutting and Botoxing and doing all those other things. I mean, my girlfriends, if their husbands leave them in their 50s, which happens a lot, I don't see them for a few weeks. And then I see them walking down the Finchley Road, these breasts arriving 5 minutes before they do. And then the lips, they have lips like that. It looks like they've got a vagina sutured to their face, which is basically collagen. They take the fat out of their bottoms and inject it into their lips, so they're literally talking out of their ass. And then I see them at the gym where they've waxed all their body hair off and trying to look like pubescent girls. And I'm like, it's the only time you'll ever hear me say this, but bring back Bush, don't you think? So there's so much pressure with the ageing for women, and it's a real feminist debate, and we have to actually start getting more vocal about, can we just see some normal-looking women on television so we don't always feel that we're freaks.
So at the moment, society regards women as productive.
Yeah.
Beyond just being carers, only if they are fertile and young-looking.
Yeah.
Do you see this looming in your lives, Ioana and Bim? Ioana first.
In a way, yes. Because I know, for example, like one of my friends, she gets this really sort of pressure that is really uncalled for from her mum because she's had some health problems, and at one point she had to take all of these pills to give her the vitamin supply that she was lacking. And at one point when she was about 9 or 10, she started gaining weight. And now I know from her family there's this really sort of pressure like, no, Laura, you can't get past this certain weight limit. And it really annoys me because, I mean, you're my mum, right? And I just absolutely don't get it. I mean, if it's gotten so far in the roots of women in general that we impose it on our own children to look a certain way and to present themselves in a certain sort of image and light, I think that is really saying something about what the media is doing to our brains. And I think that is really unnecessary and really uncalled for and really unfair, because most men don't get this. Like, the most a man can get from a job is sorry, we have a policy, clean shaven only, right? It just doesn't happen for women. Women, like, if you think about it, there's a lot of women in the audience, right? Just think about a month, right? How much time do you spend in a month making yourself look presentable, as it seems, right? How much time do you spend on your makeup? How much time do you spend on hair removal? How much time do you spend on your hair? How much time do you spend buying cosmetics? How much time do you spend buying shampoo? And how much money? Men don't really have that thing.
Well, Bim.
Yes. Sorry, I've forgotten the
Well, I
question.
suppose this is about, is society unfairly lookist only on the female sex? And how pernicious is this in our lives?
It's incredibly pernicious. It's the thing that I think the minute you're born a girl, it begins, and it doesn't end until you're dead. I think what changes is perhaps your tolerance for it. What changes is the amount of time that you actually want to give to that. But again, that's something that comes with age. And there are so many things that I remember scoffing at when people who were older than me said, oh, this will happen. And I was like, I think you'll find
Like
it
what?
won't.
Like what?
Oh, different things. I mean, for example, I care so much less about how my body looks now, even understanding that there is an idea of what it should conform to. But I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, and I'd rather be whatever than, killing myself. I mean, it's not the end of the world if I have a pooch, and that's okay. And, maybe I won't wear that dress. Or you know what? Screw it. Maybe I will wear the dress and caress my belly lovingly while I stare into the eyes of men like, yeah. I don't know. But I care a lot less. In my 20s, it was of paramount importance that I be sexually attractive, which is another thing as well, that this invisibility that no one else, again, I'm standing on my black girl platform, but do you know how invisible we are in the UK? I don't think you do if you're not black. And that's not me trying to be exclusionary, it's the truth. You won't know it because you don't see it. If the default everywhere you go is a young blonde woman, what does that mean is the not default? And I'm skinny, and I'm cute. So, we're not even on the stage, we're not there. No one's talking about that either. In as much as we talk about older women being absent, and there is no doubting that. I mean, I remember watching Strictly Come Dancing when they got rid of Arlene, and I was outraged. But then they put on Alicia, and I was like, she's black, so...
I think this is a good moment maybe to talk about ageism and whether women do suffer a double whammy of sexism, which we've talked about, and also ageism as regards much more than men. Yeah, Katharine.
Yeah. Well, I think the real... Nowadays, there's a different way in which the young are actually favoured in favour of the old, which is that they actually do, as naturally as breathing, things which we struggle to do with the computer, with the mobile phones, with all this. Yes, we do it because we can't work, can't go around, but the fact that I would ask an 11-year-old to sort my mobile phone out for me or something like that, it's not just looks, because it goes for, well, men too, because there is a plus about age. There does come a point when you stop trying to disguise it and start cashing in on it.
Good.
Though I must say, I have an age where I get a seat offered me in the tube practically always by a girl, not by a man. I think anybody looking around them will see that the case, but insofar as there's a war going on, it isn't just about women and looks.
Go on.
Well, I don't know. You can settle for trying to look reliable, and as far as Saga magazine's concerned, you can say we are now aiming at an older audience. And interestingly, I went to a thing once at Age Concern, and we were talking about how the market was very slow to catch up on the things that older people wanted to buy, like some of them like, I don't know, calculators with rather bigger things, rather bigger letters and so on. And this man said, he'd been to a thing, he said, it isn't usually the young who don't want do the things for the people who are over 60. It's the chairman who is 60 who doesn't want to be associated with that bit of the market. And there's fortunately 2 groups working on it at the moment to try to get the market to do a bit better what older people want. Like washing machines with simple instructions and not. I had an answering machine, a telephone answering machine, where if you wanted to change it, you had to tap in something which was raised battleship grey on battleship grey. And I said, well, why on earth do they sell that? And they said, well, you see, all these chaps work in very brightly lit labs. And I said, yes, but what about the marketing manager? Somebody must have noticed that this was hopeless. And I think that as far as, I'm not saying that the business about looks doesn't, of course it's true, and it's worse in any of the things which depend on looks like fashion or media, but I think also the young could actually regard the older as a market if they tried a bit harder. So if anybody's wondering what to do next, I can advise you on it later.
Kathy?
Can I say something positive about getting older? Something positive about the menopause, which no one ever talks about, is that something quite fabulous happens when you turn 50. Is that you get a kind of, oh, stuff it, I'm 50, where you don't care so much anymore.
It's happening at 31, so just so you know.
And the other interesting thing is that, you know, when you do hit the menopause, of course, your estrogen goes down and your testosterone comes up. So suddenly, you know, you don't feel so maternal. You know, you do kind of cut the umbilical cord that tethers you to the tea towel in the kitchen. And you get a little bit more selfish. In fact, you start to act a bit like a man. And the 2 top peak times for divorce now, well, you know, the majority of divorces are initiated by women, you probably know that. And the 2 peak times is when the last child finishes school, but also when the husband retires. Because for a man when he's aging, his testosterone goes down and his estrogen comes up. So because he wants to sit at home on the couch nesting, and the woman, you know, you're like, I have done, how many flocks of, you know, of chickens have I cooked, and how many schools of smoked salmon have I put? No, we want to go out and conquer the world. So it's a real difference now, and it's going to be a big problem in the saga generation about this increase in divorce. But if you think about the most powerful and interesting women in the world, they're all postmenopausal. You know, it's Hillary Clinton, Christine Lagarde, Oprah Winfrey, Madonna. You know, the women who are striding the world, the stage, and making the world better for women are all postmenopausal. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is something to look forward to, but not the hot flushes. No. And you take something called HRT, which is made from mare's urine. So, you know, I keep thinking I'm going to start tossing my mane and sort of go, nay, yay and nay, you know. So that's the downside.
So, you know, you've got it all to look forward to, because the older you get, potentially the more powerful we get, and the less we care about our chicks in the nest.
Yeah.
So that's all good. So, but how about claiming power now when you are young and vibrant and you are of value to society? What battles do you think you guys have to face to my left?
I think every battle that has been fought will be fought again. It's not, I don't think it requires a special looking glass to realize. I mean, earlier, Ioana said something about nowadays they ask if you're engaged, and I thought that's not nowadays. That's for all time. That happens. That has happened, where you hide your ring and so on. The more it changes, the more it stays the same. I mean, on a personal level, something I said at the beginning is that, forgive the catchphrase, but leaning in. I think a lot of us, it's not on us alone, it's on a culture, is that we don't push as much as we could. A lot of us don't have the ability to push, and that's not an accident. That's something that was arrived at by, oh God, I sound like a conspiracy theorist, the men. But I do think there is a culture that requires you to have certain attributes, and those attributes are considered to be male attributes, and so those are pushed. And I think, for me, the best work mentors I've ever had are women. And the reason for that is because they've been there, and they understand that what happens in these places where discrimination is rife is that people pick people who are like themselves. And if men are running the show, they will pick men. And it's not even a conscious bias, it's just a thing. We pick people who are similar to us. It's what happens with the Etonians. It's what happens with essentially the old boys network. And that's why when people say stuff like, I want to get there on my own merits and blah, 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 I'm like, well, no one else that's there got there on their own merits alone.
Exactly. There's already a quota system applied throughout.
This is it. It's an informal quota. And we don't talk about that. And I've spoken to women who will say things like, I would hate to think I got there because, and I'm like, screw it, man. Like,
who cares?
Generations of dudes. That's all they've done. That's all they've done. So what, we're going to just sit here and kind of go, no, I want to get there on my, fuck that. Just go. Just do it. And we're not doing that enough. No one is doing it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the sexism is so innate in the language still. Like a man in the workforce who's a go-getter, who's assertive, is called a natural leader.
Yeah.
And a woman who's assertive is still a ball breaker and a bitch and all that sort of thing. Exactly. And that's sexism too. You were saying earlier that you hadn't felt a lot of sexism in your life, but the sexism is still in the language when it comes to how we view sex. If you think about it, that we go for gold in the hypocrisy Olympics when it comes to attitudes to sex, because a man who's sexually active is still called a love god, a stud muffin, Lothario, Romeo. Yeah. A woman who has the same sexual appetites as a man is still a slut, a tart, a slapper, a mole. Yeah. It's like, men still expect you to be so virginal. It's like when the guy says to you, oh, darling, am I the first man to make love to you? To which the woman replies, of course, I don't know why you men keep asking the same silly question. But I think that is a big issue for young women, that there still is this kind of sexist stereotyping.
And I think that's the problem, it's that it's so innate and it's so inherent in the culture that I think sometimes it feels difficult. There are times when I criticize things and I get a couple of replies and people kind of go, oh, you're so sensitive. And I go, no, it's because we've establish this as the way it is, as opposed to thinking about the way it could be. We don't, there are small things, like you said, that even in the language, and luckily that's where I tend to work. I write almost exclusively on pop culture, and I think I make a big effort, and every so often, if you follow me on Twitter, you should, but if you follow me on Twitter, I tweet a lot about handsome guys, and I use the language that lots of men use about women. When they're describing how sexually attractive they are. And I think it's not, sure, I like very handsome men, sue me. But I think in describing it that way and using that kind of language back, it kind of exposes the fact that women still kind of aren't allowed to say that Ryan Gosling's ass is nice. And it is. But we're not allowed to say that.
Does he talk out of it? That's what
no, and that's the other thing. He's a fucking feminist. I love him. I want to kiss him on the face. Anyway, my point is, is that it's so in the culture. No one's talking about it because we don't even know that we're doing it. And I think once you realize that you are, that's half the battle, because then you push from that. And like I said, I'm really lucky. I have platforms beyond Twitter, or I write for newspapers and magazines, and I think that's a really nice and simple and actually, hopefully, useful way of challenging stuff that no one's challenging. And, I think more people need to be saying more. And I think, again, it's that thing, like I said, when someone said to me about the, quotas or, that's how I got onto The Guardian, by the way. I applied for an internship that is specifically for black and ethnic minority journalists, and I got on, and I got in, and now I get to edit parts of The Guardian. And I wouldn't have done that without that, this is the thing. My ability was never in doubt. I'm a freaking great journalist. I'm really good. But I wouldn't have got into The Guardian without that thing. So I am completely, when people talk about, for example, this is my last example, sorry, I'll stop. But the White House, and I remember someone saying to me after the Obamas came in, and someone said, oh, wow, they've really filled the White House with lots of black people, haven't they? And I said, yeah, but George Bush filled the White House with lots of white people. These black people existed, their skill sets existed at the time that George Bush was in the White House. He didn't hire them because we hire people who are like us. That's it. That's the starkest example in recent memory that I can say. These people were out there with the same skills, with the same abilities, but they weren't hired until the Obamas were there. And the reason why the Obamas hired them is because the Obamas knew them. Do you see how it works? So when we talk about, I don't want to be there on a quota, screw it, jump on the quota, tick it. Do you know who, by the way, in America is the highest recipient of affirmative action? It's white women. Look it up, I'm not lying. again, this is about the language of the media and so on and so forth. My point is, you've got to lean in. Horribly, I hate that phrase so much, but you have got to lean in. You've got to push. And I think the more of us do that, the more the culture will change. So what Ioana was saying about the idea of, being an equalist is fantastic. Good. But until we get to that stage, fucking quotas, yeah.
So I think the panel divides on quotas. I think my position is that if you have a country where 80% of everything is run by men, there's an informal and very pervasive quota system applied already, and we definitely do need quotas for any change. We're going to open it up to questions, but Ioana, I want to hear what you think about the fact that basically women are described as, in the press or in the media, as how they look, and men for what they do. And this, it's more important that a woman's skin is black than what she does, even in the White House.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think that's not a secret anymore, and I also think it's horribly disgusting. But I think that it's, what Bim was saying as well, is that it's so in the culture, and we're so used to seeing it every day that we suddenly think, oh, it's all right, it happens everywhere, it's not just us, so if they do it, we can do it. It's fine. But that is just not the way forward. The way forward is, asking yourselves, well, why do we do this? I mean, it sounds quite wrong to me. If it sounds quite wrong to me, it might sound quite wrong to other people. If I do it, others will do it. Yeah. Lead by example, move on, get a better society and a better situation. It makes sense, but it takes time to happen. And the problem with women nowadays is that we don't have the confidence. I was speed mentoring yesterday. 2 women came up to me saying, I want to do this thing. I don't have the drive. I don't have the confidence. I don't know how to motivate myself. And I looked at them and said, well, it's all within you. Make a plan, make it achievable, stick to it, do it. It's all that simple. It's not rocket science. We can do it. It's just the way that society has conditioned us to think that we can't. And that is horribly, horribly wrong. And please believe that it's wrong, because it is, and it pains me to see how many brilliant women don't achieve their full potential because they have been told that it's a man's thing. It's really not. Everyone can do the same bloody thing. I mean, if you look at the First World War, when all of the men have had to go out and fight for their country, and the women have had to take on the jobs that were thought to be too demanding, too challenging for those women at that time. And they came out and went to work, and most of them died making shells because it was horribly unsafe, but they still did it. And I think that just shows how powerful we are in a way. If you look back on history, it just sort of brings out these examples just to push them back up again.
Thank you. Ioana Anghelescu, remember that name. I think we have a future leader. I think Malala said yesterday here that the reason where men keep women down is not because of our weakness, but because of our strength, and they're frightened of our power. Thank you. Now, to all our panelists, Bim Adewunmi, Ioana Anghelescu, Katharine Whitehorn, Kathy Lette, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for coming to WOW. In other words, feminism's Christmas.